She pulled the worn shawl off her shoulders, folded it once, and laid it on the auction table like a woman laying down her own name, and said loud enough for every man in Red Creek to hear, "If you mean to sell me, then look me in the eye while you do it." 7 men had already turned their backs on her that morning. 7. And not one had called her by name. If you're watching this, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. There's a moment in part 5 I promise you won't see coming. And drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The town hall in Red Creek smelled of sawdust and sweat, and Lydia Carter stood at the center of it, like a fence post somebody had forgotten to pull up. She kept her chin level. That was the one thing her father had taught her that still held. Keep your chin level, girl, no matter who's looking. He'd said it the winter before the fever took him, and she'd been saying it to herself every morning since. "Next," called Mayor Hollis from behind the long table. A man in a brown coat stepped up. He was maybe 50, with a belly that strained his buttons and a way of looking at her that made her skin crawl backward off her bones. "This the Carter girl?" he asked. "That's her," Hollis said. "Lydia Carter, daughter of the late Samuel Carter the carpenter." "Carpenter's dead, I heard." 3 years now." The man walked a slow circle around her. Lydia did not turn to follow him. She kept her eyes on the window at the back of the hall where the summer light came in white and merciless. "Open your mouth," the man said. "Beg pardon. Your teeth, girl. Let me see 'em." "My teeth are my own business," Lydia said. A few of the women along the wall tittered. The man's face darkened. "I'm offering to take you off this town's hands," he said. "You'd do well to remember that. Ain't a man here gonna feed a woman with a mouth like that." "Then don't feed me," Lydia said. "I've gone hungry before. I expect I'll manage it again." The man snorted and waved a hand at Hollis. "Pass. She's got no manners and no money. What good's a wife who'll argue you to your grave?" He stepped back. That was one. Hollis made a mark on his paper. Next. The morning had started early. Red Creek called it the Founders' Fair, and once a year, the families with marriageable daughters brought them to the hall so the bachelors from the outlying ranches and the men passing through could look them over. It was dressed up in ribbons and lemonade and the Reverend's blessing. But Lydia had stopped pretending years ago that it was anything other than what it was. It was a sale. The girls with money and family stood up front in clean dresses, beside mothers who fussed over their collars. Lydia stood at the end. She had no mother to fuss. She had a dress that had been turned twice and a pair of boots that had been her father's packed at the toe with rag. The second man was younger, a rancher's son with soft hands that had never known a rope. He looked at her for a long moment and then leaned into Hollis and said something low. "He asks," Hollis said, clearing his throat, "whether you can bear children." The room went quiet. Lydia felt the heat climb her neck. "Tell him," she said, "that I don't reckon it's any of his concern unless he plans to be present for it." The young man's ears went red. "She's too sharp," he muttered. "My mother'd never abide it." He stepped back. That was 2. A widow near the front clucked her tongue. "Poor thing," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "If she'd just smile, she'd have an easier time of it." Lydia did not smile. The third man didn't even come close. He stood at a distance, looked her up and down once the way a man looks at a horse. "He's already decided is lame," and shook his head before Hollis could so much as say her name. 3. The fourth was old enough to be her grandfather. He had buried 2 wives already. The whole town knew it, and there were whispers about how the second one had gone. He smiled at Lydia with brown teeth and said, "I like a woman with fire. Keeps a man warm." "I'd sooner freeze," Lydia said. He laughed like she'd told a joke and turned to Hollis. "What's her price?" "There's no price set, Mr. Pruitt. It's a matter of agreement between—" "Everything's got a price," Pruitt said. "What'll the town pay me to take her? She eats, don't she? Cost you money to keep her fed and the rest of us to look at her sour face every Sunday. I'll do you a favor. Give me $10 and I'll haul her off." Something cold opened up in Lydia's chest. She had stood for the looking. She had stood for the questions. But this a man asking to be paid to take her like she was a hole in the road the town wanted filled. This was a kind of low she had not let herself imagine. "You'd have to drag me," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything else in her wanted to. "And I promise you, Mr. Pruitt, you'd not enjoy the trip." Pruitt's smile fell off his face. "She's spoiled," he announced to the room. "Somebody let this one think she was worth something." He spat on the floorboards and walked off. 4. The Reverend's wife came over, then a thin woman named Mrs. Abernathy, with a face like a closed Bible. She took Lydia by the elbow and steered her a step to the side, lowering her voice. "Lydia, I knew your mother, God rest her, so I'll speak to you plain. You are making a spectacle. There is no shame in being poor, but there is shame in pride. You have no land, no dowry, no family to speak for you. These men are your only chance at a roof over your head. Why are you fighting them?" "Because they're not buying a roof for me, ma'am," Lydia said. "They're buying me. And I'd like to keep the part of myself that knows the difference." Mrs. Abernathy's mouth pinched. "That part of yourself will not feed you in January." "No, ma'am," Lydia said. "But it's about all I've got left, and I find I'm not ready to sell it for $10. The older woman let go of her elbow like it had burned her. "On your own head, then," she said, and walked away. 5 was a quiet man who had lost his wife to childbirth and needed a mother for his 3 little ones. For half a heartbeat, Lydia softened toward him because there was no cruelty in his face, only a tiredness she recognized. But when he spoke, it was not to her. "Can she keep house?" he asked Hollis. "Cook so mind, young'uns. That's all I want. A pair of hands. I don't need her to talk." "I expect she can do all of that," Hollis said. The man nodded slowly. "She'll do then, long as she keeps quiet." And Lydia, who had nearly let herself want at the children, the work, the having of a place, heard the words "long as she keeps quiet," and felt the softness in her go hard again. "I won't keep quiet," she said. The man blinked. "What?" "I said I won't keep quiet, sir. I'd mind your children. I'd love them even given the chance, but I won't go through the rest of my days as a pair of hands that doesn't speak. So you'd best find someone who can." The man looked at her a long moment, and there was something almost like regret in it. "Pity," he said softly, and stepped back. 5. The 6th didn't matter. A drifter with whiskey on his breath who couldn't keep his eyes from her body and made a sound low in his throat that turned her stomach. Hollis himself waved that one off before Lydia had to say a word, which was the single decent thing the mayor did all morning. 6. By then, the hall had begun to thin. The other girls had been spoken for or near to it. Lydia could see the Pearson daughter laughing with a young rancher by the door, his hat in his hands, his whole future written plain across his hopeful face. That was how it was supposed to look. That was the dream they sold along with the lemonade. The 7th man was the one that broke something in her. He was respectable. That was the worst of it. A storekeeper from 2 towns over, clean-shaven, a watch chain across his vest, a man who would never spit on a floor or smell of whiskey. He looked at Lydia with what she might almost have called kindness, and she made the mistake of letting herself hope. "Miss Carter," he said, and he was the first all day to use her name. "I've heard you're a hard worker and an honest one. Those are qualities I admire." "Thank you," Lydia said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "I'll be straight with you, because I think you'd want that." He folded his hands. "I'm willing to take you on, but I'll need to know there'll be no more of this." He gestured vaguely at the room at the wreckage of the morning at her. "No more talking back, no more scenes. A wife who shames her husband is no use to anyone. So I'll ask you plain. Can you learn to hold your tongue and know your place?" And there it was, dressed in a clean vest and a watch chain. The same question as all the rest. Lydia looked at him, this decent man offering her decency in exchange for her silence, and she understood with a terrible clarity that there was no kind of man in this town who would have her whole. Only in pieces. Only with the most of her cut away. She thought about her father. "Keep your chin level, girl." "I can learn most things, sir," she said. "But I don't learn to be less than I am. And I'm sorry for it because you seem a good man. I expect you'll make some woman a fine husband, but she won't be me." The storekeeper's kind face cooled the way a stove cools when you stop feeding it. "I see," he said. "Then I've wasted both our time. Good day, Miss Carter." He tipped his hat, the only man to do it, and walked out. 7. The hall was nearly empty now. Hollis set down his pen and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Abernathy stood by the door with her arms crossed and her judgment plain. The few stragglers left had begun to murmur, and the murmur had a shape to it, and the shape was Lydia. 7, somebody said. 7 men, and she turned away every one. Turned them away, they turned her away. Either road she's done. No man'll have her after this. What's the town to do with her then? Can't keep feeding a girl too proud to be married. Hollis stood. He was not a cruel man, only a weak one, which on certain mornings amounts to the same thing. "Miss Carter," he said, and he would not look at her. "I think you can see how this has gone. The town has been more than patient. We've given you every chance. But a woman who can't be settled is a burden, and Red Creek can't carry burdens it didn't make. I'm afraid we'll have to consider other arrangements. The county home. Or perhaps the territory has work for women who—" "You'd put her out," said a voice from the back of the hall. It was not loud. That was the strange thing. It did not need to be. It cut across Hollis's words clean as an axe through a green branch, and every head in the room turned toward the door. A man stood in the open doorway with the white summer light at his back. He was tall, and he wore it like a man who had stopped noticing he was tall. Trail dust on his boots and on the shoulders of his coat. A face that hadn't been smoothed by indoor years, burned brown hard at the jaw with a few days of beard. He didn't sweep his hat off the way the young ranchers had. He didn't smile. He stood in the doorway and let the room look at him, and the room which had been so full of cruel music a moment before fell entirely silent. Lydia did not know him, but she knew the kind of him. Everyone in Red Creek knew of the man who lived up on the high ridges past the tree line, who came down twice a year for supplies and salt, and whatever the town couldn't refuse to sell him, who paid in gold dust and never stayed the night. Mountain folk. The men called him half-wild behind his back. The women crossed the street. Ethan Calloway. "Mr. Calloway," Hollis said, and there was a new note in his voice. Not respect exactly, but the careful tone a man uses with a thing he doesn't fully understand. "This is town business, a private matter." "Sounded public enough," Calloway said. "Heard most of it from the street." He stepped inside. The boards complained under him. You were fixing to put a woman out. To the county home. Or to the territory for work. He let the words sit there ugly. That what passes for charity in Red Creek now. You don't know the circumstances. "I know she's standing in the middle of your hall like a horse you couldn't sell," Calloway said, "and I know not one of you has the decency to be ashamed of it. I'd call that circumstance enough." The room held its breath. Lydia stared at him. After a morning of being talked over, talked about, priced and weighed and dismissed, here was a stranger speaking about her as though she were a person who'd been wronged. The unfamiliarity of it made her throat ache. "Now see here," said Pruitt, who had not in fact left, but had been lurking by the lemonade. "That girl's nothing but trouble. Turned away 7 good men this morning. 7 a woman that won't be had is a woman that's no good to anybody." Calloway turned his head slowly toward Pruitt. He did not raise his voice. 7 men looked at her, he said, and not one of them saw her. I'd say that's 7 men's failing, not hers. Pruitt's face went purple. "Who do you think you are? Mountain man, coming down off your rock to lecture honest folk." "I'm the man who's still talking," Calloway said, "while you've gone quiet. Sit down, Pruitt." And Pruitt, to the astonishment of everyone including himself, sat down. Calloway crossed the floor. He stopped a respectful distance from Lydia, close enough to speak to her, not close enough to crowd her. And then for the first time that whole morning, a man took off his hat. He held it against his chest. He looked at her face, not her teeth, not her hips, not the turned hem of her dress, and he said, "Ma'am." It was a small word. Lydia had heard it 10,000 times. But the way he said it, like it cost something, like she was owed it, it undid her more than all the cruelty had. She felt her eyes sting, and she blinked hard, because she'd be damned if she'd weep in front of this town. "Sir," she managed. "I heard you say something when I was coming up the street," Calloway said. "You said if they meant to sell you, they'd look you in the eye while they did it." He paused. "I figure that's the truest thing anybody said in this hall today." "You heard that," Lydia said. "I did. And what did you make of it?" Calloway considered her. There was no hurry in him. He was a man who had clearly spent years where there was no one to hurry for. "I made of it," he said, "that you're not for sale, and that everybody in this room's been too busy haggling to hear you say so." Hollis cleared his throat, gathering himself. "Mr. Calloway, with respect, the matter still stands. The town cannot support an unmarried woman with no family and no means. If you've some interest in Miss Carter, then perhaps we might discuss—" "I'm not here to buy her," Calloway said sharply, and the temperature of his voice dropped 20 degrees. "Let me be clear so there's no confusion later, and so this town can't tell itself a comfortable story. I will not pay you a cent for this woman, not $10, not one. A person is not goods. The moment money changes hands over her head, you've made her a thing, and I'll have no part of making any soul a thing." The hall was silent. "Then what?" Hollis said slowly. "Are you proposing?" Calloway turned back to Lydia. And now for the first time something in his hard face shifted, not softening exactly, but opening the way a door opens onto a room you didn't know was there. "I'm not proposing anything to him," he said with a small jerk of his chin toward Hollis. "I'm asking you, ma'am, because you're the only one in this hall whose answer signifies." "Asking me what?" Lydia's heart was beating so hard, she was sure he could see it move the fabric of her dress. "I've got land up the ridge," Calloway said. "More than one man needs. Cabin's sound. There's water, there's game, there's work that's honest and hard and never finished. It's a long way from anywhere, and it's no easy life. I won't lie to you about that. The winters are long, and the summers'll cook you, and there's no town to run to when you're lonesome, because there's no town at all." He turned his hat once in his hands. "But there's no one up there to ask if you can bear children. No one to make you open your mouth. No one to tell you to hold your tongue or know your place. Up there, your place is wherever you choose to stand." He met her eyes. "I'm offering you a way out of here. Not a marriage. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want. A contract if you'll have it. Honest work, for honest keep, and a roof that's yours as much as it's mine, and a man who'll speak to you with respect for as long as you're under it. That's all. That's everything I've got to offer. And it's not much, but it's offered free, and it's offered to you, and it's yours to take or leave." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Mrs. Abernathy found her voice. "This is indecent," she hissed. "A young woman alone with a man on a mountain? Mr. Calloway, you cannot seriously suggest—" "I'm suggesting she be allowed to choose," Calloway said without looking at her. "Which is more than this town's offered her all morning. As for decency, ma'am, I'd be careful talking to me about decency if I'd just watched a girl get priced like a heifer and called it a founder's fair." Mrs. Abernathy's mouth snapped shut. Calloway waited. He did not press. He held his hat against his chest and stood there before her patient as a mountain, while Lydia Carter felt the whole shape of her life pivot on a single morning. She thought of all of it at once. The county home. The territory work that no one would name plainly because everyone knew what it was. The years of being a burden the town hadn't made and didn't want. The slow grinding shame of being looked at and found wanting again and again, until she started to wonder whether the town was right, whether she really was worth nothing, whether the pride her father had given her was just foolishness she couldn't afford. And then she thought, he took off his hat. "Why?" she asked him, and it came out raw. "Why me? You don't know me. You walked in 5 minutes ago. You owe this town nothing and you owe me less. So why—" Calloway was quiet a moment. When he spoke, he didn't perform it, just said it the way a man says a thing he's known a long time. "Because I came down off that mountain to buy salt," he said. "And I heard a woman's voice through an open door telling a room full of men to look her in the eye. And I thought—" He started again. "I've lived alone a long time, ma'am. Long enough to know the difference between a person who's beaten and a person who's just been left standing in a hard place too long. You're the second kind. Anybody with eyes could see it if they bothered to look." He turned his hat. "7 men looked at you today and saw a problem. I looked at you and saw the only person in this room I'd want at my back if the weather turned. That's the truth of it. You can make of it what you will." Lydia's eyes were burning now, and she didn't care anymore who saw. "It's no easy life," she said. "You said so yourself." "It's not. I might hate it. I might hate you." "You might," Calloway agreed. "And if you do, I'll bring you back down off that ridge myself and put you anywhere you want to go and not say a word against it. You're not a prisoner. You'd never be a prisoner. You walk away the day you decide to, and I'll wish you well doing it. That's my word. And up the mountain, my word's the law, because there's no other law to speak of." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth the first one. "Which means it's better than the law you've had down here." A laugh came out of Lydia before she could stop it. Half a sob, really, but a laugh underneath. The town stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Lydia?" Hollis said, alarmed, now sensing the morning slipping somewhere he hadn't planned. "Be reasonable. You don't know this man. He could be anyone. He could be anything. To go off alone into the wilderness with a stranger, it's madness, it's a choice," Lydia said. Hollis blinked. "What? It's a choice, Mr. Hollis?" She turned and looked at him, and at Mrs. Abernathy, and at Pruitt slumped sullen on his bench, and at all the rest of them, the whole town that had raised her and weighed her and found her wanting. "You stood me up in this hall and let 7 men decide what I was worth. You were going to ship me off to the county home or worse, and not one of you would have lost a wink of sleep over it. And now a stranger walks in off the street, and the first thing he does, the very first thing, is hand me a choice." Her voice cracked, and she let it. "Do you understand what that's worth to a woman who hasn't been given one in 3 years? Do you have any idea?" The hall said nothing. She turned back to Calloway. He hadn't moved. He stood there with his hat against his chest and waited the way she suspected he waited for weather for game. For the slow turning of seasons up on his ridge without complaint, without hurry, ready to take whatever came. "I don't trust you," Lydia said to him. "You'd be a fool to," Calloway said. "You've known me 10 minutes. I don't trust you," she said again. "And I'm not saying yes because I do. I'm saying yes because there's not one thing left for me in this town, and you're the first man in it who looked at me like I was a person. That's not love, Mr. Calloway. That's not even trust. That's just the only door that's open. So I'll walk through it. But I'm walking through with my eyes open, and the first time you treat me like those 7 men did, I'm gone mountain or no mountain. Are we understood?" Ethan Calloway looked at her for a long moment. And then he did the thing that finished it, the thing Lydia would remember years on as the moment her whole life turned. He held out his hand. Not to take hers, not to lead her. He held it out flat, the way you'd hold a hand out to make an agreement between equals, between partners, between 2 people standing on the same ground. "We're understood, Miss Carter," he said. "Eyes open. That's the only way I'd want it. You shake my hand, it's not a sale, and it's not a wedding. It's a bargain between 2 free people, and either one of us can break it. That suits you." Lydia Carter looked down at that hand, brown and scarred and steady, and then she looked back up at the town that had tried to sell her, and then she looked at the man who would not. She put her hand in his and shook it. "It suits me," she said. A sound went through the hall. Not a cheer, nothing so warm as that. A kind of shocked exhalation, the noise a crowd makes when something happens they were sure could not. Mrs. Abernathy pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Pruitt swore under his breath. Hollis sank back into his chair, the pen still in his hand, his founder's fare come apart in front of him. "You'll regret it, girl." Pruitt called out ugly to the last. "He'll work you to the bone and bury you on that mountain, and no one'll ever find your grave." Calloway didn't even turn around. He settled his hat back on his head, and he said loud enough for the room, "If she ever wants to come down, Pruitt, I'll bring her down. And if she wants to stay, that'll be her own free choosing, which is a thing you wouldn't recognize if it bit you." Then quieter to Lydia. "You got things you need to fetch, ma'am. Anything you want from here." Lydia thought about it. 3 years she'd lived in the back room of the boarding house scrubbing floors for her keep. 3 years of careful swallowed pride. She had a trunk with her mother's quilt in it and her father's old square and chisels she couldn't bring herself to sell. And not one single thing else in this town she'd grieve. "My father's tools," she said. "And a quilt, that's all. Everything else can stay." "Then we'll fetch your tools and your quilt," Calloway said, "and we'll be gone before the heat of the day." He stepped back to let her go first. He held the door. And Lydia Carter walked out of the Red Creek Town Hall and into the white summer light with her chin level. Keep your chin level, girl, past the 7 men who would not have her. Past the women who had whispered past the mayor and the reverend's wife, and the whole machinery of a town that had tried to put a price on a person and been told for once, no. At the door she stopped. She turned back. The whole hall was watching her. "I want you all to remember something," she said, and her voice did not shake at all now, not one bit. "You had me here 3 years. 3 years I scrubbed your floors and minded your children and asked you for nothing but a little plain respect. And not one of you could spare it. A stranger could. A man you call half wild, a man you crossed the street to avoid. He managed it inside of 5 minutes free of charge." She let that land. "So when you tell this story later, and you'll tell it for years, I'd be obliged if you'd tell it true. Don't say the mountain man bought the Carter girl. He didn't buy a thing. Say the town tried to sell her and couldn't, because a person isn't goods." She found Mrs. Abernathy's eyes and held them. "And if you can't manage to say it true, ma'am, then I'd thank you not to say my name at all." Then she turned and walked out into the sun, and Ethan Calloway followed her, and the door swung shut behind them on a hall that had, for the first time anyone could remember, absolutely nothing to say. Outside, the heat came down like a hand. The street was empty, baked pale, the kind of summer that made the dogs lie still in whatever shade they could find. Calloway's horse stood at the rail, a big gray with a pack saddle, and beside it a second animal, a steady-looking bay mare. "You ride?" Calloway asked. "My father taught me." "Good. The bay's gentle. She'll mind you." He went about checking the cinch, his hands quick and sure, and over his shoulder he said, "I want to say something, and then I won't say it again, because I expect you've had a bellyful of being told things this morning." "Say it." He straightened and looked at her across the back of the horse. "You don't owe me," Calloway said. "Whatever happens up there. You don't owe me thanks. You don't owe me a smile. You don't owe me your trust. And you sure as hell don't owe me yourself. I didn't do a kind thing back there to be paid for it. I did it because it was the only thing a man could do and still call himself a man. So you can put down whatever weight you picked up in that hall, the part where now you've got to be grateful, where now you've got to earn it." He shook his head. "There's nothing to earn. You're a free woman who's made a free choice. That's all. That's everything. Don't let anybody, including me, make it into less than that." And Lydia Carter, who had stood dry-eyed through 7 rejections and a town's worth of cruelty, stood in the empty street and finally, quietly began to cry. Not from grief, but from the unbearable relief of being, for the first time in 3 years, simply believed. Calloway didn't make a thing of it. He didn't rush to comfort her or tell her to hush. He just turned back to the horses and gave her the gift of pretending not to notice checking straps that didn't need checking until she'd gathered herself again and wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's fetch my father's tools." "Yes, ma'am." He tipped his hat to her, and as they led the horses down the empty sunstruck street toward the boarding house with the whole town watching from behind its curtains, Lydia Carter understood that she had no earthly idea what she was walking into. Not the mountain, not the work, not the long isolation, not the man whose name she'd known for one single hour. She didn't know if she'd up there or only a different kind of hardness. She didn't trust him. She'd told him so to his face. But for the first time since her father had died and left her alone in a town that measured her in dollars, Lydia Carter was walking towards something she had chosen. And she found, as her father's words came back to her one more time, "Keep your chin level, girl," no matter who's looking, that her chin was already level. It had been level all along. The boarding house sat at the end of the street, and Lydia Carter went up the back stairs she'd climbed 1,000 times, only this time she did not knock. Mrs. Pearson was waiting in the upstairs hall with her arms folded. Word traveled fast in Red Creek, and the word had beaten Lydia home. "So it's true," Mrs. Pearson said. "You're going off with him." "I'm fetching my things, ma'am. After everything this house has done for you, 3 years I gave you a roof." "You gave me a floor to scrub for that roof," Lydia said, not stopping moving past her toward the little room at the back. "And I scrubbed it. We're square." "That man is a savage. They say he killed a—" "They say a lot of things, Mrs. Pearson." Lydia pushed open the door to the room that had been hers. "Most of it about me this morning. I find I've stopped putting much stock in what they say." The room was small and held almost nothing. She knelt at the foot of the cot and pulled the trunk out from under it, and the lid came up with the smell of cedar and her mother's lavender sachet long gone to dust. The quilt was folded on top. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, her father's square and his good chisels and the small block plane he'd made her hold as a girl, his big rough hand over her small one, teaching her the grain. "He'll ruin you," Mrs. Pearson said from the doorway. "You'll be back here in a month ruined, and don't expect this house to take you in." Lydia closed the trunk. She stood and she turned, and she looked at the woman who had housed her 3 years and never once asked how she was sleeping. "I won't be back," she said simply. "Not because I'll be ruined, because there's nothing here worth coming back to. You should know that, ma'am, before I go. There's not one soul under this roof I'll think about twice." She lifted the trunk. It was not heavy. Her whole life weighed less than a sack of feed, and she carried it down the back stairs and out into the white heat where Ethan Calloway was waiting with the horses. He took the trunk from her without a word and lashed it to the pack saddle quick and tight. He didn't ask what had passed inside. He didn't ask if she was sure. He just secured her father's tools and her mother's quilt to the gray as carefully as if they were made of glass, and Lydia watched his hands do it and felt something in her chest she didn't have a name for. "Ready," he said. "No," she said honestly. The corner of his mouth moved. "Good. A person who says they're ready for the mountain usually isn't. Mount up, Miss Carter. We've got light to use." She put her boot in the stirrup of the bay and swung up, and the mare stood steady under her the way Calloway had promised, and Lydia gathered the reins in hands that remembered even after 3 floor-scrubbing years exactly how to hold them. They were not 20 feet down the street when a boy came running. "Mr. Calloway! Mr. Calloway, sir!" Calloway reined in. The boy was maybe 12, barefoot, gasping, and Lydia recognized him. Tommy Hollis, the mayor's youngest, the only Hollis she'd ever had a kind word from. "Easy, son," Calloway said. "Catch your breath. My pa says—" The boy bent over his knees, panting. "My pa says you can't take her. He says it ain't legal. He says she's a ward of the town on account of her being poor and no family, and the town's got a say in where she goes, and he's sending for the marshal." Lydia felt the cold come back into her chest. But Calloway only sat his horse calm as a stone in a creek. "Did he said. He says the marshal will be here by sundown, and you're to stay put till then, or it's kidnapping." Kidnapping. Calloway turned the word over. He looked at Lydia. "You feel kidnapped, Miss Carter. I feel like the first free thing I've done in 3 years is about to be taken from me by the same men who tried to sell me," Lydia said, and her voice was tight. "That's how I feel." Calloway nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something. Then he looked back down at the boy. "Tommy, is it?" "Yes, sir. You run back to your pa Tommy, and you tell him this word for word. Tell him there's no law on this earth makes a grown woman a ward of a town that tried to sell her at a fair. Tell him if he wants to call the marshal, he'd best be ready to explain to that marshal exactly what was happening in that hall this morning, and exactly what price old Pruitt was asking to haul her off, because I'll be glad to testify to every word of it, and so will 20 other folk who were standing there watching and doing nothing. His voice never rose. That was the terrible thing about it. Tell him a marshal who hears the words town tried to sell a woman is a marshal who starts asking questions the mayor of Red Creek does not want asked. You tell him all that, Tommy, and then you tell him I said good day. The boy's eyes were huge. Yes, sir, he whispered, and he turned and ran. Calloway clicked his tongue and the horses moved on. Will it work? Lydia asked low. It'll work, Calloway said. Your mayor's a weak man, and weak men fold the second a thing costs them more than it's worth. Right now he's angry. By the time that boy's done talking, he'll be scared. By sundown, he'll have decided the whole business never happened, and inside a week he'll be telling folks he was glad to see you settled. He glanced at her. It's how their kind always go. They've no spine to stand on. Just remember that next time one of them makes you feel small. There's nothing under the meanness but fear. They rode out of Red Creek the way they'd come in, down the one street past the church, and the mercantile, and the last few houses, and Lydia did not look back. Not once, though every nerve in her body wanted to. She kept her chin level, and her eyes forward, and the town fell away behind them into the heat shimmer, and within an hour there was nothing around them but the wide brown country and the blue wall of mountains ahead. They rode in silence a long while. Calloway was not a man who filled the quiet, and Lydia found to her surprise that she didn't mind it. After a morning of being talked at, the silence was a kind of mercy. But the questions were piling up in her, and finally she let one out. You said you came down for salt. I did. You didn't get any. Calloway almost smiled. No, I didn't. So you'll have to come down again. I expect so. Then it wasn't worth it, Lydia said. Whatever you think you did back there, you came down for salt, you got a woman who doesn't trust you, and a town that wants the marshal on you, and you still don't have your salt. Calloway was quiet a moment, the horse's hooves steady on the hard ground. I've gone without salt before, he said. I never once had to go without being able to look at myself. I'll take the trade. He shifted in his saddle. And you keep saying that you don't trust me. You don't have to keep saying it, Miss Carter. I heard you the first time, and I'll hear you if you say it the 100th. You're not obliged to trust me. You're obliged to nothing. I told you that already. I keep saying it, Lydia said slowly, because I keep waiting for it to stop being true. For you to do the thing they all do sooner or later, the thing where it turns out the kindness had a hook in it. There's no hook. That's exactly what a man with a hook would say. And at that, Ethan Calloway laughed, a real one, short and surprised, like a sound that didn't get much use. Fair enough, he said. Fair enough, ma'am. Then I won't try to talk you out of it. Watch me instead. Words are cheap. You watch what I do over the next while and you decide. That's the only honest way to know a man anyhow. It was nearer to evening when the land began to climb. The brown plains gave way to scrub, and then to pine, and the air changed. Lydia felt it before she understood it, a thinning, a coolness creeping in under the heat. The bay mare leaned into the grade, and the questions in Lydia which had quieted came back sharper because the higher they went, the more real it all became, and the more real it became, the more frightened she let herself be. How far? She asked. Couple hours yet. And there's no one. You said there's no one. No one for half a day's ride in any direction. He looked over at her, and he must have seen something in her face because his voice gentled. That frightened you? Yes, Lydia said. She was done lying about small things. Yes, it frightens me. I've spent 3 years in a town full of people who didn't care whether I lived or died, and somehow it never scared me the way the thought of no people at all does right now. She gripped the reins. If something happens to me up there, if I'm hurt or sick or there's no one, if something happens to you, there's no one. We're just 2 people on a mountain, and if it goes wrong all the way with nobody to come. That's true, Calloway said. He didn't soften it. That's exactly true. It's the whole shape of the life. There's no one to come. Which is what come for yourself and for whoever's with you. Down in the town, a person can be useless their whole life and never know it because there's always somebody to pick up the slack. Up there. He nodded at the climbing pines. Up there, a person finds out fast what they're made of. There's no hiding from it. Some folks can't bear it. He paused. I've got a notion you're not most folks. But I've been wrong before, and you'll have to find out for yourself which it is. So will I. They came over a last rise as the light was going gold, and Lydia saw it for the first time, the place that was to be her home. A cabin low and broad and sound, built of squared logs by a hand that knew what it was doing, set into a shoulder of the mountain, with the pines at its back and a long fall of land before it. A stream came down off the higher ground and ran near the door. There was a barn, a corral, a garden patch turned and tended. It was not the wild den the town had imagined when they spoke of the half-wild man on the ridge. It was a place a careful man had made with years of labor. Lydia reined in and looked at it. You built this, she said. Most of it. Some of the cabin was here when I came. The rest is mine. It's... She stopped. She had been about to say beautiful, and that wasn't a word she was ready to give him yet. It's more than I expected, she said instead. The town makes it sound like you live in a hole. The town makes a lot of things sound like a lot of things. He swung down off the gray and came around to her stirrup, but he didn't reach up to help her. He just stood there ready if she needed it, leaving the choosing to her. She got down on her own. He nodded like that was the right answer. Come on, I'll show you where things are, and then I'll see to the horses, and we'll get some food in you. You've had nothing since this morning, and you've had a worse morning than most. He led her to the cabin door and opened it and stood back to let her go first. Inside it was plain and clean. A stone hearth swept. A table, 2 chairs, and Lydia noted the 2 chairs and wondered at them. A solitary man with 2 chairs, but said nothing. A bed against one wall neatly made. A second smaller room off the main one with a narrower bed in it, the door standing open. That room's yours, Calloway said before she could ask. Door's got a bolt on the inside. I put it on this afternoon before I came down, soon as I... He stopped. Lydia turned. Soon as you what? A muscle worked in his jaw. He was a man she was learning who found the truth easy in big matters and hard in small ones. Soon as I'd decided, he said finally. I rode down for salt this morning, that's God's truth. But I'd been thinking a while now that this place was too much for one man and getting to be too quiet, and that if the right circumstance ever... He shook his head. I'm making a hash of this. What I mean to say is, I didn't plan on you, Miss Carter. I want to be straight about that, so you never think you walked into a trap I'd laid. I didn't know your name this morning, but I'd built that second room 2 years ago with the half a thought that someday it might be somebody's, and I put the bolt on the door today because the second I heard what that town was doing to you, I knew I'd offer. And I knew if you came, you'd want a door you could lock against me until you'd decided I wasn't worth locking it against. He met her eyes. So there it is. The bolt's on your side. I'll never have a key to it, because there's no key because it's a bolt. You shut that door at night and there's not a thing in this world I could do about it, and that's how I made it on purpose. Now you know. Badou. Lydia stood very still. In a single day, she had been priced like livestock by 7 men and offered freedom by a stranger, and she had thought she'd used up all the feeling a person had in them. But this undid something else in her, some last braced and guarded thing. A bolt on the inside of the door. A man who had thought before he'd ever met her that a woman in his house might need to lock him out, and had built her the means to do it, and told her so plainly and asked for nothing. Why are you like this? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Her voice had gone unsteady. I've known cruel men, and I've known weak men, and I've known men who were kind right up until kindness cost them something. I don't have a place to put a man like you. I don't know what you want. And it's making me afraid because in my experience, a man who wants nothing is a man who hasn't named his price yet." Calloway leaned against the doorframe. He looked tired suddenly, not weak, but worn, a man who had carried something a long way. "I had a sister," he said. Lydia went still. "Younger than me. Her name was Beth." He was looking at the floor now, not at her. "Our folks died when I was 19 and she was 14, and I raised her best I could, which wasn't good enough because I was a fool kid myself. When she was 17, a man came through smooth as creek stones, and he had money and manners, and he looked at Beth like she hung the moon, and I let her go with him because I thought, what do I know? I'm a hard man with hard hands. What kind of life can I give her? And here's a fellow can give her a real one." His jaw tightened. He gave her 2 years of it. Then he stopped pretending. "By the time word got to me, she was already—" He stopped, started again. "She was already in the ground. They told me she fell. I never believed it. I went looking for him, and I never found him. And I've spent a long time up on this mountain learning to live with the fact that I handed my sister to a man because he had money and manners, and I never once thought to ask her what she wanted because she was poor and a woman, and I figured the choosing belonged to somebody else." The cabin was silent. The stream ran soft outside the door. "So that's your answer, Miss Carter," Calloway said, finally looking up at her. "That's what I want, since you keep asking, and you deserve the truth. I want to never again, as long as I live, watch a woman get handed off like goods, while everybody, including the men who claim to love her, decides her worth for her. That's the whole of it. That's the only thing on this mountain you've got to fear from me. It's not a hook. It's an old wound, and it's mine, and you didn't cause it, and you don't have to heal it. You just have to let me do the one thing that lets me sleep at night, which is to stand between a person and that fare you stood in this morning and not ask to be paid for it." He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll see to the horses. There's bread and salt pork in the box, and you're welcome to it. Your room's your room. Bolt the door tonight if it helps you sleep. I won't think less of you. I'd think less of you if you didn't." And he walked out, and Lydia Carter stood alone in the doorway of the small room with the bolt on the inside, and she thought she understood finally what kind of man she had ridden up a mountain with. She did not bolt the door that night. She told herself it was because she was too tired to think of it. But that was a lie, and she'd promised herself she was done with small lies. The truth was, she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain, the stream, the wind in the pines, an owl somewhere, the deep, enormous silence underneath it all, that the town had never had, and she listened to Ethan Calloway moving quietly in the main room, banking the fire, and then the creak of his own bed, and then nothing. And she lay there with the bolt undrawn, not because she trusted him, she told herself, but because she wanted to know. She wanted to find out what kind of man he was when he thought a thing was possible and chose not to do it. And in the morning, the door was just as she'd left it, and he was up before her, and there was coffee, and he said, "Morning, ma'am," exactly the way he'd said ma'am, in the hall, like it cost something, and she was owed it, and Lydia understood that she had her answer, and that it frightened her more than cruelty ever had, because cruelty she knew how to survive, and this she did not. The days that followed taught her the shape of the work, and the work was harder than scrubbing floors, harder than anything the town had asked of her. But it was different in a way that mattered more than she'd have guessed. In the town, her labor had bought her nothing but the right to be tolerated. Up here, every job she did made the place more able to keep them alive, and Calloway never once let her labor go unseen. "That woodpile," he said the third evening, "is stacked better than I'd have done it. You've got an eye for how a thing holds together." "My father was a carpenter," Lydia said. "I used to stack his offcuts. He said a sloppy stack falls and a tight one stands all winter." He was right. Most men never learn it. He said it plain as a fact, and moved on, and Lydia carried the small, clean weight of it around in her chest for the rest of the day, like a stone warmed in the sun. But it was not all warmth. They were two people who had each lived alone, each in their own way, and two such people put under one roof strike sparks. The first real one came in the second week. She had taken it on herself to clean out the barn, and she'd moved his things, coiled rope, a set of traps, an old saddle to do it properly. And when he came in and saw it, he went still in a way she'd learned to read as anger held on a short rein. "Who told you to move my gear?" he said. "No one told me to do," Lydia said, straightening up, the old town-bred wariness flaring in her. "I cleaned the barn. The gear was in the way. I moved it. It's all there, every bit, just to the side. Those traps were set the way I set them for a reason. That rope was coiled the way I coil it for a reason. Up here, a thing out of its place can get a person killed. You understand me? You go reaching in the dark for a rope that's not where it's supposed to be. And that's a long fall or a snake bite, or—" "Then tell me where they go," Lydia snapped, and her voice cracked across the barn, loud enough to startle the horses. "Don't you stand there and bark at me like I'm a dog that fouled the rug. I didn't move your things to spite you. I moved them because I'm trying to be useful, because being useless up here gets a person killed too. You said so yourself. So either you teach me where the rope goes, Ethan Calloway, or you do every blessed thing in this barn yourself for the rest of your life. But you do not get to have it both ways. You don't get to want me capable and then snarl at me for trying." The barn rang with it, and Calloway stood there, and the anger went out of his face, slowly replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "You're right," he said. Lydia blinked. She had been braced for a fight. "What?" "You're right, I'm sorry." He took his hat off, ran a hand through his hair, put it back on. "I've lived alone 11 years, Miss Carter. Everything in this place is exactly where I put it, because for 11 years there was no one to put it anywhere else. A thing moves, my first thought is, something's wrong. Somebody's been at my gear, because for 11 years, if my gear moved, it was a bear or a thief and nothing good. That's my failing, not yours. You were trying to help, and I bit you for it, like one of those 7 men, I expect." He looked genuinely stricken at that. "That's the truth, isn't it? I sounded just like them." "A little?" Lydia admitted, because she'd promised herself the truth. "For a second, you did. Then I'm twice sorry." He let out a breath. "Here's what we'll do. The rope hangs there on that peg coiled clockwise so it pays out clean. The traps go in that box sprung so a hand reaching in doesn't lose a finger. The saddle on that rail. You learn those 3 things, and the barn's yours to keep however you see fit, and I'll not say another word about it. That suits you. It suits me." And Lydia. It was the first time he'd used her given name. They both heard it. He pressed on like he hadn't. "You're not useless. You were never going to be useless. I knew that in the hall. Don't take a clumsy thing I said in a bad moment and make it into proof of the worst thing the town ever told you. You're worth 10 of them. I mean that." She had to turn away from him, then busy herself with the horses, because her eyes had gone hot and she would not let him see it twice. That night at the table, she said without looking up from her plate, "I didn't bolt the door, the first night, or any night since." Calloway's fork paused. "I know," he said. "You know. There's no sound like a bolt sliding. I'd have heard it. I never did." He went back to eating. "I'm glad of it. Not because—" he searched for the words. "Not because of what you might think a man means by that. I'm glad of it because it means you're starting to believe me. And I'd rather you believe me than fear me, that's all." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Lydia said. "I still don't trust you. I know that too. I'm only telling you I haven't bolted the door. And I'm only telling you I'm glad." A pause. "We can leave it there if you like." "We'll leave it there," Lydia said. But something had shifted, and they both knew it, and the not trusting had become a smaller and stranger thing than it had been, a habit she kept up more out of stubbornness than belief. The trouble, when it came, did not come from the mountain. It came up the mountain. It was near 3 weeks in a hot, still afternoon, and Lydia was in the garden when she heard the horses, more than one, coming up the trail that Calloway said no one used but him. She straightened, the back of her neck prickling, and saw Calloway come out of the barn, already moving his rifle in his hand, not pointed at anything, just in his hand, the way a careful man holds a tool he hopes not to use. "Get inside," he said low. "What is it?" "Don't know yet. Get inside, bolt the door, and don't come out till I tell you. Go on now, please." It was the pleas that moved her. She went, but she didn't bolt the door. She stood just inside it, watching through the crack, her heart going hard. 3 riders came up into the yard, and Lydia's stomach dropped because she knew the lead one. She knew the watch chain across his vest and the clean-shaven, respectable face. It was the 7th man, the storekeeper from 2 towns over, the one who'd tipped his hat and called her by name and asked if she could learn to know her place. And beside him rode a man with a tin star on his coat, the marshal. And behind them both, fat and sweating and triumphant on a tired horse, rode Pruitt. "Afternoon," Calloway said, easy, the rifle still just resting in his hand. "Long way up for a social call." "It's not social, Mr. Calloway," the storekeeper said. He had a paper in his hand. "It's legal. This here's a marshal, and this is a writ, and I've come to collect what's mine." "And what's that?" Calloway said. The storekeeper smiled, and it was a different smile than the one he'd given Lydia in the hall, with nothing kind left in it at all. "The Carter woman," he said. "Turns out a contract was struck, Mr. Calloway, signed and witnessed the morning of the fair before you ever walked in. Mayor Hollis has it in his own hand. I paid good money for that woman's keep, and she's bound to me by law, and you've been harboring another man's promised wife for 3 weeks. He held up the paper, and Lydia, watching through the crack in the door, felt the whole bottom drop out of the world. "So you can hand her over, peaceable mountain man, or the marshal here can take her and take you too for theft of a man's property." Calloway didn't move. He didn't so much as glance at the paper. "Read it to me," he said. The storekeeper frowned. "What?" "The writ, the contract. Read it out, loud, so the marshal hears it and so I hear it. You say there's a signature and a price and a binding. Then read it to me, mister. I don't believe I caught your name." "Wickham," the storekeeper said. "Harold Wickham. And I don't have to read you a—" "Marshal?" Calloway turned to the man with the star, and his voice was perfectly level. "You rode up a mountain on this man's say-so. You've got a right to know what you rode up for. Have you read it yourself?" The marshal shifted in his saddle. He was an older man, gray at the temples, with the look of someone who had seen enough to be tired of it. "I've seen it. It's got the mayor's seal." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you read it, the body of it, the words." The marshal was quiet a moment. "Mr. Wickham represented the contents." "I'm sure he did," Calloway said. "Then let's all hear them together. Go on, Mr. Wickham. You came a long way to wave that paper. Wave it with words." And Lydia, watching through the crack in the door, saw Harold Wickham hesitate, just for a breath. But she saw it, and she understood that Ethan Calloway had seen it too, had been fishing for exactly that hesitation, had known it would be there before he ever asked. "It's a standard ward agreement," Wickham said, recovering, but a beat too late. "The town transfers responsibility for an indigent woman to a man of means in exchange for—" "In exchange for $10, Calloway said. "That's the number, isn't it? That was Pruitt's number in the hall. $10 to take a woman off the town's hands. So the contract's not you paying for a wife, Mr. Wickham. It's the town paying you. $10 to haul away a problem. That's what that paper says, if it says anything at all." "That's a lie," Pruitt blurted from the back. "He's twisting it. There's a price on her fair and square, and it's owed, and—" "There it is," Calloway said softly. He still hadn't raised his voice. He looked at the marshal. "You hear that, Marshal A. price on her? Out of his own mouth. Now I want you to think hard about the next thing I'm going to say, because you're a lawman, and your name's going to be attached to whatever happens in this yard." He paused, and the pause did more work than any shout could have. There is no law in this territory that lets a town sell a woman. None. You know it, and I know it. What these men have got is a piece of paper a weak mayor signed to make a shameful thing look legal. And the second you carry that paper into a real courtroom, a circuit judge, a territorial court, the first question that judge asks is going to be the same one I just asked. "Read it to me." And the words are going to come out, and the words are going to be the price of a human being. And it's not Mr. Wickham who's going to hang for it. It's not Pruitt. It's the man who enforced it. It's the marshal who rode up a mountain to take a free woman at gunpoint because a storekeeper waived a receipt. The yard had gone very quiet. "You want to be that man?" Calloway asked the marshal almost gently. "Your age, with your years, you want that to be the thing they say about you when you're gone, that you were the law that helped a town sell its women." The marshal looked at the paper in Wickham's hand for a long moment. And inside the cabin, Lydia could not stand it any longer. She opened the door. "Lydia," Calloway started. "No," she said, stepping out into the yard, into the full hot light, and her chin was level. "No, I'll not hide behind a door while 4 men decide what I am, Ethan. I did that once already. I'm done doing it." She walked out until she stood beside Calloway, not behind him, beside him, and she faced the 3 riders. "Mr. Wickham," she said, "you tipped your hat to me in that hall. You're the only one of the 7 who called me by my name. I thought for 1/2 a minute you might be a decent man, so I'll give you a decent man's chance to leave with what's left of your dignity. Get off this mountain. You don't speak to me like—" "I'll speak to you however I please, sir, because you're standing on land that isn't yours, holding a paper that pretends to own me, and I find my manners have run clean out." Her voice rang across the yard. "You want to tell that marshal you bought me? Go on. Say it to my face the way I made you all promise to do. Tell me to my face that you paid $10 and I belong to you. Say it. And then explain to him how a free woman comes to be bought and sold in the United States territory, because I confess I'd like to hear it explained myself." Wickham's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "He can't say it," Lydia said, turning to the marshal now. "You notice that Pruitt'll say it because Pruitt's too stupid to know better. But Wickham won't, because Wickham's smart enough to know exactly how it sounds out loud. And if it can't be said out loud in a yard, marshal, how do you reckon it's going to sound in a courtroom?" The marshal was looking at her now, really looking the way Calloway had looked at her in the hall, like she was a person who'd been wronged. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "did you sign anything?" "No, sir, not one thing. No one ever asked me to. They didn't think my signature signified. They struck their bargains over my head like I was a heifer at market, and the first man who ever asked me what I wanted was this one." She nodded at Calloway. "And what I wanted was to leave, and I left of my own free will, and I'd do it again." "And the bolt on your door?" the marshal asked. "Up here alone with this man, has he?" "He built me a door I could lock against him," Lydia said, "and gave me the only way to lock it, and never once asked for the key, because there is no key, because he made it a bolt on my side a purpose. I've never had to use it. He's never given me cause." She let that sit. "Now you tell me, Marshal, in your years of carrying that star, how many men have you known who'd do a thing like that?" The marshal said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned in his saddle slow, and he looked at Harold Wickham, and his face had changed. "Give me the paper," he said. "Marshal, give me the paper, Wickham." Wickham handed it over his hand, not quite steady now. The marshal unfolded it and read it. Actually read it. His lips moving slightly, taking his time, while the sun beat down and nobody dared speak. And Lydia watched his face, and she saw it go from tired to something harder, and she knew before he said a word. "This," the marshal said, "is not a ward agreement." He looked up at Wickham. "This is a bill of sale. You changed 2 words and put the mayor's seal on it, but it's a bill of sale, Wickham, the same as you'd write for a mule. Item 1, woman $10 paid." His voice was flat with disgust. "You rode me up a mountain to enforce a slave paper, in the territory, 11 years after the war." He folded it once hard. "I ought to arrest the both of you on the spot." "Now hold on," Pruitt started. "Shut your mouth, Pruitt, or I'll find a reason." The marshal turned back to Lydia and to Calloway, and he touched the brim of his hat, and it was a different gesture entirely from Wickham's oily courtesy in the hall. "Ma'am, Mr. Calloway, I apologize. I came up here believing a lie, and that's my own failing for not reading before I rode. It won't happen twice." He nudged his horse around. Wickham Pruitt, you're riding back down with me, and we're going to have a long talk with Mayor Hollis about exactly what got signed at that fair, and whose names are on it, and what a circuit judge is liable to make of the whole rotten business. Move. You can't. Wickham's voice had climbed to something thin and frightened. I've got rights, You've got a paper that says you bought a person, the marshal said, and you handed it to a federal marshal with your own 2 hands. Whatever rights you think you've got, son, I'd start praying they're better than that. Now move. And just like that, it broke. Pruitt was already turning his horse, sweating worse than before. Wickham sat one more moment staring at Lydia with a hatred that had nothing respectable left in it, and Lydia stared right back and did not give him 1 inch of her eyes. This isn't finished, Wickham said. It was finished in the hall, Lydia said. You just hadn't heard yet. They rode down the mountain, the 3 of them, the marshal at the rear, like a man herding stock, and Lydia and Calloway stood in the yard and watched them go until the trees took them, and the only sound was the stream again and the wind in the pines. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Calloway let out a breath that seemed to come up from his boots, and he leaned the rifle against the corral rail like it had gotten heavy, and he said, You weren't supposed to come out of that cabin. I know. I asked you to stay inside. I know that too. Lydia turned to face him, and she found she was shaking now that it was over, her hands trembling at her sides, the fear she'd held down through the whole standoff coming up all at once. I couldn't do it, Ethan. I couldn't stand behind a door one more time and let men decide. I'd rather have been wrong out here in the open than safe behind that bolt. Do you understand? I had to stand in it. I had to stand in it on my own 2 feet, or I'd have spent the rest of my life knowing I hid. Calloway looked at her, and something moved across his face that she'd never seen there before. Something that wasn't his careful steadiness or his old worn grief. It looked almost like awe. You turned that marshal, he said quietly. I had him leaning, but you turned him. With that question about the courtroom. That was Lydia. That was the smartest thing I ever saw a body do under that kind of pressure. I've faced down men with guns, and I've never been as cool as you just were facing down a paper. I was terrified, she said. I know you were. I could see your hands. That's what makes it the bravest thing, not the least brave. A man who's not scared isn't brave, he's just stupid. You were scared clean through, and you walked out that door anyway, and you cut Wickham off at the knees with nothing but the truth in your own 2 eyes. He shook his head slowly. I keep thinking I've taken your measure. I keep being wrong. You're more than I figured in the hall, and I figured you for a great deal. And Lydia, shaking terrified, emptied out by the whole long, terrible morning of it, felt the strangest thing happen in her chest. It was the thing she'd been waiting 3 weeks for and dreading. It was the hook finally showing itself, except it wasn't a hook. It was the opposite of a hook. It was the absence of one made so plain and so undeniable that she couldn't hide behind her not trusting anymore. I have to tell you something, she said, and I need you not to make a thing of it. All right? I trust you. The words came out of her rough like they'd been stuck. There. I said it. 3 weeks I've been telling you I don't, and I've been lying for about 2 of them. And after what you just did, after the way you stood there and never raised your voice and never reached for that gun and just unmade their lie with words, I can't lie about it anymore. I trust you, Ethan Calloway. I don't know what to do with it. It scares me worse than Wickham did. But it's true, and I'm done not saying true things. Calloway was quiet a moment, and then he did exactly what she'd asked. He didn't make a thing of it. He didn't smile too big or step toward her or reach for her. He just took his hat off the way he had in the hall, and he held it against his chest, and he said, "Thank you, ma'am. I'll try to be worth it." And that was all. And it was exactly right. They went back to the work, because on a mountain, the work doesn't stop for feelings. And there was water to haul, and the garden to tend, and supper to think about. And the ordinary rhythm of it was a mercy after the fear. But something had changed in the air between them. A wall come down that neither of them named. And Lydia caught him looking at her once across the woodpile and didn't look away. And he didn't either. And then they both went back to what they were doing with the small, foolish, near smiles of two people who have admitted a thing they're not ready to say plainly. That night at the table, she asked him the question she'd been carrying. Wickham said it isn't finished. Was he just talking? Calloway set down his cup. He was a man who she'd learned would not comfort her with a lie, even when the lie would have been kinder. No, he said. He's talking. The papers beat, and the marshals turned, and Hollis is going to spend the next month trying to pretend none of it ever happened. But Wickham, he frowned. A man like that doesn't ride up a mountain for $10. $10 is nothing to a man with a watch chain and a store in 2 towns. So I've been asking myself the whole time he was standing there. Why's he want you so bad he'd forge a slave paper and drag a marshal up a mountain over a woman he met for 2 minutes in a hall? A cold finger touched the back of Lydia's neck. And what did you decide? I decided it's not about you, Calloway said slowly. Or not only. I think you walked into the middle of something, Lydia, that morning in the hall, and I don't think it's got much to do with whether you can cook or bear children. I think there's a reason a respectable storekeeper from 2 towns over showed up at a one-horse founders fair in Red Creek looking for a poor carpenter's daughter that nobody else wanted. And I think the reason has a price on it a lot bigger than $10. I don't have anything, Lydia said. Ethan, I came up this mountain with a trunk, my father's tools and my mother's quilt. That's the sum of everything I own in this world. There's nothing for a man like that to want. Your father. Calloway leaned forward. Samuel Carter, the carpenter. He died 3 years back, you said, of the fever. Yes. Did he own his land? The house you lived in before the town took you in? Lydia opened her mouth to say no and stopped, because she didn't actually know. I was 21, she said slowly. I didn't when he died. There was the fever and the funeral, and then the town came and said there were debts and the house had to be sold to settle them, and they were doing me a kindness, taking me in, and I was grieving, and I was alone, and I signed what they put in front of me, because I didn't know any better, and there was no one to tell me different. Her voice had gone thin. I never read it, Ethan. I was 21, and my father was dead, and they put a paper in front of me and I signed it. The same as Wickham just, oh God, the same as the paper Wickham just, easy, Calloway said. Did they take my house from me? Her hands had gone cold. Did they take it for debts that maybe weren't even real, and tell a grieving girl it was charity? Is that what happened to me, and I was too young and too sad to see it? I don't know, Calloway said, but I aim to find out. Because if your father owned that land clear, and there were no real debts, then the town didn't take you in out of Christian charity, Lydia. They took your house and your land, and they took you in to keep you quiet and grateful and too beholden to ask questions. And 3 years later, when you got too proud to be quiet and grateful when you stood up in that hall and made trouble, they tried to ship you off to the county home so the questions would go away for good. His jaw was tight. And somewhere in the middle of it is a storekeeper named Harold Wickham who wants you bad enough to forge a paper. Which makes me think your father's land is worth a great deal more than a one-horse town let on. Which makes me think there's something on it, or under it, or coming to it, that somebody found out about after Samuel Carter was in the ground, and his daughter had signed it all away for a back room and a mop. The cabin was silent. The stream ran on outside in the dark. My father's tools, Lydia whispered. What? She was already up, already moving to the trunk against the wall, dropping to her knees and throwing back the lid. Pulling out the quilt, reaching for the oilcloth bundle of her father's square and chisels and the little block plane. Her hands were shaking. My father was a careful man, she said, unwrapping the tools with trembling fingers. Carpenter careful, a place for everything. He used to say the most important thing a man owns he keeps where his hands go every day, because a man checks his tools every day and never thinks to check a strong box. She set the chisels aside. She picked up the block plane, the one he'd taught her on his big hand, over her small one. She turned it over. The base plate was held with 2 small screws. He gave me this plane the week before he died, Ethan. He was already sick. He pressed it into my hands, and he said, you keep this one. Liddy, this one's yours. You keep it close. And I thought I thought it was just a dying man being sentimental about his tools. I thought. She got the first screw out with her thumbnail, then the second. The base plate came away, and there folded into the hollow of the plane's body, pressed flat and yellowed, and waiting 3 years, in the one place no town official would ever think to look, was a piece of paper covered in her father's careful carpenter's hand. Lydia's hands shook so badly she could barely unfold it. "Read it," Calloway said, kneeling down beside her. "Read it slow." She smoothed the paper flat against her knee, her father's hand. 3 years she'd had this plane in a trunk and never known. "To my daughter Lydia," she read, and her voice broke on the first line, and she had to start again. "To my daughter Lydia. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am sorry I could not tell you with my own mouth. I have been a poor man my whole life, and I let this town believe it because a poor man is left alone. But the South 40 of our land, the rocky piece, nobody wanted the piece I bought for $2 an acre, because everyone said it was good for nothing. There is a spring on it, Liddy, and the spring runs over a seam of color that I have known about for 6 years and told not one living soul." She stopped. She looked up at Calloway. "Gold," he said softly. "It is gold," she read, her voice gone to a whisper. "Not much that a man can see, but enough that an assayer in Denver told me the seam runs deep and that the land is worth more than this whole town put together, and that I must tell no one, because the moment they know they will find a way to take it. I have seen what gold does to small towns and to the men who run them. So I have kept it secret, and I have kept us poor on purpose, and I am sorry, Liddy, for the years you went hungry sitting on a fortune, but I judged it safer to be a poor man's daughter than a rich man's target." Calloway had gone very still. "The deed is real, and it is filed in the Territorial Land Office in the capital, not in Red Creek, where Hollis could get his hands on it. It is in my name, Samuel Carter. And upon my death, it passes to you, and you alone, free and clear, no debts upon it, for I owe no man a penny, and never have, whatever they may tell you. If anyone says there are debts, Liddy, they are lying, and they are lying to take what is yours. Trust no one in Red Creek. Not Hollis, not the Reverend, not anyone who smiles too easy. Take this paper and the deed number written below it, and find an honest lawyer in the capital, and the land is yours. I am sorry I could not give you an easy life. I tried to give you a safe one. Keep your chin level, girl. Your loving father, Samuel Carter." At the bottom in his careful hand a string of numbers. The deed reference. For a long moment neither of them moved or spoke. Then Lydia pressed the paper to her chest and bent over it, and wept 3 years of it coming out at once for her father, who had gone hungry on purpose to keep her safe, and died before he could explain. For the girl of 21, who'd signed away her birthright over a fresh grave because a town told her it was kindness. For every cruel weighing she'd stood through in that hall, while the very men weighing her knew what she was sitting on. Calloway didn't touch her. He waited. And when the worst of it had passed, and she sat up and dragged her sleeve across her face, he said quietly, "Now we know why Wickham rode up a mountain." "They took my house," Lydia said. Her voice was raw, but it had gone hard underneath, harder than he'd ever heard it. "They told me there were debts. There were no debts. My father just said so in his own hand. They took the house in town to settle debts that never existed, and they couldn't touch the South 40, because the deed's filed in the capital, in his name passing to me, so the land's been sitting there 3 years, mine free and clear, while they tried to figure out how to pry it loose. That's why the county home, Ethan. That's why shipped the troublesome Carter girl off to the territory where nobody would ever see her again. A dead woman or a vanished one can't claim a deed. And Wickham found out about the gold. She was thinking fast now, the grief burning off into something cold and clear. Somehow. Maybe the assayer. Maybe Hollis let it slip trying to find a buyer for what he couldn't legally sell. A respectable storekeeper from 2 towns over doesn't come to a Red Creek Founders Fair for a wife. He came to marry the deed. Marry me, and a husband controls a wife's property, and the gold's his, all legal, no forgery needed. That's the long game. The bill of sale was just him getting impatient when I left with you before he could put a ring on it. Calloway looked at her with something close to wonder. You worked all that out in about a minute. I had 3 years to be stupid, Lydia said. I'm done being stupid. She folded the paper and held it tight. We have to go to the Capitol. We have to get to that land office before Wickham or Hollis figures out the deed's the thing that matters before they bribe a clerk or burn a record. Or Ethan, if anything happens to that filing, it's my word down. We have to go now. We will, Calloway said. First light. It's 2 days' hard ride to the Capitol, and we'll not make it in the dark, and a broke neck on a night trail helps nobody. First light, Lydia, I promise you, and I'll get you there if I have to carry the horses. He stood and held a hand down to help her up, and this time she took it without thinking, and he pulled her to her feet and didn't let go right away, and neither did she. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be the longest 2 days of your life. She didn't sleep much, but she didn't bolt the door either, and somewhere in the small hours, lying awake with her father's letter under her pillow, she heard Calloway moving quietly in the main room, and she got up and opened her door and found him cleaning the rifle by the low fire. Couldn't sleep either, she said. No. She sat down across the fire from him. Tell me the truth about something. Always do. This is more than you bargained for. She watched his hands work the oiled cloth. You came down for salt. You meant to do one decent thing for one wronged woman, and bring her up a mountain and give her a life. You didn't sign on for forged papers and a gold deed and a marshal in the yard and a 2-day ride to fight a town. This is more than any man owes a woman he's known 3 weeks. So I'll say it plain, and I'll mean it. If you want to put me on the bay and point me toward the Capitol and stay clear of all this, I'll understand. It's not your fight. It was never your fight. Calloway set down the rifle. You finished? He said. I'm finished. Then I'll say my piece, and I'll say it once. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the firelight hard on the planes of his face. 11 years ago, I handed my sister to a smiling man with money because I figured the world had already decided she belonged to whoever could pay for her, and I was too much a coward to argue. She died for it. I've spent every one of those 11 years telling myself that if I ever got the chance to stand between a woman and the men who'd price her, I'd take it no matter what it cost me, because that's the only way I ever get to look Beth in the eye again wherever she is. His voice was steady, but there was iron under it. Now here's the chance, the exact chance. A woman, the men want to own a fortune, they want to steal a fight, nobody else will fight for you, because you're poor and alone, and a woman the same as Beth was poor and alone, and a woman. You think I'm going to put you on a horse and stay clear of it? You think there's a power on this earth could make me stay clear of it? He shook his head slowly. It's not your fight alone, Lydia. It hasn't been since you put your hand in mine in that hall. I'm in it to the end, whatever the end is. So don't ever again offer to let me off easy. There's no off easy. There's just you and me and that deed and the road to the Capitol, and I'll be on it beside you, and that's the last I'll say about it. Oh no. Lydia looked at him across the fire for a long moment. All right, she said softly. Beside me, not in front. Beside you, he agreed. I learned that lesson in the yard today. They rode out at first light. 2 days the journey was supposed to take, and the first day went hard, but clean down off the mountain and out across the dry country, the horses good under them, the miles falling away. They spoke little and watched the back trail often. Calloway pushed the pace right to the edge of what the animals could bear, and no further a man who knew exactly how much horse he had under him. It was the second day that the trouble found them. They'd stopped to water the horses at a creek crossing near midday when Calloway went still the way he did, his head coming up like a deer that's caught a scent. Riders, he said. Behind us, coming fast. Lydia turned. Far back along the trail a smudge of dust. How many? 3, maybe 4. He was already tightening cinches. They've been pushing harder than us, which means they're not afraid of killing their horses, which means they don't mean to need them again after today. He looked at her. They mean to stop us before the land office, Lydia. They've worked out the same thing you did. The deed's the whole game, and we're carrying it to the one place they can't reach. Wickham and whoever he could buy or scare into riding with him. He swung up onto the gray. We can't outrun them, not with the lead they've got and the horses spent. But we don't have to outrun them. We only have to reach the capital, and the capital's close half a day no more. We get into the streets, into a crowd, find the land office or the federal marshal's post, and there's not a thing they can do in the open. So we ride, and we ride smart, and we don't stop for anything. You hear me? Anything. I hear you. They rode. The dust behind them grew. Lydia's whole world narrowed to the bay's neck and the trail ahead, and the sound of Calloway's gray beside her, and the slow, terrible understanding that the riders were gaining a little foot by foot, because their own horses were 2 days spent, and the men behind them had ridden fresh mounts into the ground to catch them. "They're closing," she called. "I see it." "What do we do?" Calloway's jaw was set. "We come up on the river crossing ahead, the Pinto. It's running low this time of year, but it's running fast, snowmelt off the high country cold and quick over the rocks. There's a ford. We cross there, and the far bank's the last hard mile before the Capitol Flats." He glanced back at the dust. "If we can get across the Pinto with even a small lead, we make it. If they catch us at the water—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The river came up sooner than Lydia expected, fast and loud over its stones, and the ford was a churn of white water that looked nothing like the gentle crossing the word ford had made her imagine. "It's deeper than it should be," Calloway said, grimly reining up at the bank. "More melt than I figured. The horses can make it, but they've got to take it slow and pick their footing, or they'll go down on the rocks. Stay close to me. Keep her head up. Don't fight her. Let her find her own feet. Lydia, don't look at the water. Look at the far bank. You fix your eyes on the far bank, and you don't take them off it no matter what." They started across. It was the longest 100 feet of Lydia's life. The cold of the water bit through her boots and up her legs. The current pushed at the bay's flanks, and the mare staggered, found her footing, staggered again. Behind them, faint over the roar of the river, she heard a shout. The riders at the bank now close, too close. "Keep going," Calloway said. "Eyes on the bank. Almost there." They were 3/4 across when it happened. A rifle cracked behind them. The bay screamed and reared, not hit, but terrified by the shot, and Lydia, who had been holding the reins exactly right, who had kept her eyes on the far bank, felt the world tip as the mare's hindquarters went out from under her on the slick rock. She had time for one thought, the deed. The letter there in my coat, and then she was in the river. The cold hit her like a fist. The current took her instantly, rolling her, and her head went under, and came up, and went under, and the rocks tore at her, and the water filled her mouth. And somewhere very far away, she heard Calloway roar her name. She came up once, long enough to see him already off the gray, already in the water, fighting toward her against the current that was sweeping her past him. Then the river slammed her into a boulder, and the world went white with pain, and her arm, her left arm, folded the wrong way, with a sound she felt more than heard. And she screamed and swallowed water, and went under again. And this time the cold and the pain and the dark all came up to meet her at once. And her last clear thought was that she was sorry. She was so sorry she'd had the truth in her hands for one single day, and now it was going to wash away down a river in the territory. And her father had died for nothing. A hand closed on her collar. Iron hard it hauled her up out of the water into the air, and an arm went around her and dragged her against a body she knew, and Calloway's voice was in her ear. Ragged, furious, terrified. I've got you, Lydia. I've got you. Don't you let go. Don't you dare let go of me." She didn't remember the rest of the crossing. She remembered the cold, and the pain in her arm, and his arm like a band of steel across her chest, and the way he kept talking, kept saying her name, kept saying "I've got you" over and over, like the words themselves were what was hauling them through the water. And then there was mud under her the far bank, and she was being dragged up out of the river onto solid ground, and she was coughing up half the Pinto, retching and shaking and alive. "Don't move!" Calloway's hands were on her fast and sure, finding the arm. "Don't move, your arm's broke. I can feel it hold still." "The riders!" she gasped. Couldn't follow. His voice was grim with savage satisfaction. Their horses balked at the water after the bay went down. They're stuck on the far bank watching us, and they can't get across, and by the time they find a crossing downstream, we'll be in the capital. We made it, Lydia. You hear me? We made it across. The deed's still on you. I checked, it's in your coat. The oilcloth kept it dry, and we made it. Across the river, dim, through her paint, see them. 3 men on the far bank. And the one in front, off his horse, standing at the water's edge with his fists clenched, was Wickham. He was screaming something the river ate. He had ridden 2 days and killed his horses and put a bullet near a woman in a river, and he was going to stand on that bank and watch the deed he'd forged and schemed and chased after ride into the capital out of his reach forever. You lose, Wickham! Calloway roared across the water, the only time Lydia ever heard him truly raise his voice. You hear me. You lose. And then he turned back to her, and all the fury drained out of his face at once. And what was left was something she had never seen on him. Something raw and undefended and frightened in a way the gun and the riders and the river had never frightened him. Your arm, he said. Lydia, your arm's broke and you're soaked through and shaking, and we're still a half day out, and I can't. His hands hovered over her helpless for the first time since she'd known him. Tell me what to do. I've set bones on horses and on myself, but I never tell me what you need. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you need. And Lydia Carter, lying broken and freezing on a riverbank with a fortune in her coat and a town's worth of cruelty behind her, looked up at this man who had pulled her out of a river. He could have died in this man who'd raised a dead sister's ghost into a vow and kept it at the cost of everything. Easy. This man who had asked her what she needed when every other man in her life had only ever told her what she was worth, and she understood with a clarity that cut clean through the cold and the pain that the thing she felt for him was not gratitude and was not trust, and had stopped being either of those small safe things some while back without her permission. Ethan, she said, I'm here. You went in the river. Her teeth were chattering. There was a man shooting, and the water would have killed you, and you didn't even stop. You went in. Course I did. Why would you say it like that? Course I did. Like it's nothing. You could have died. He looked at her soaked and shaking himself, his hand still hovering over her broken arm, like he was afraid to touch her, and afraid not to. Because the second you went in that water, Ethan Calloway said very quietly, I found out a thing about myself I'd been too much a coward to look at straight. I found out there's not a fortune or a deed or a vow or a dead sister's ghost on this earth I wouldn't trade to get you back out of it. I found out somewhere between the hall and this riverbank, you stopped being a woman I was protecting and started being... His voice caught, broke the careful, steady man. Come all the way undone at last. Started being the only thing I've got left that I'd be sorry to lose. So don't ask me why I went in the river, Lydia. You went in the river. There wasn't any second thing for me to do. Lydia couldn't answer him. The cold and the pain took her words, and she lay shaking on the bank, while across the river, Wickham screamed himself hoarse and could not cross. So Calloway answered for both of them the way he always had with his hands, and not his mouth. He stripped off his own coat dry on the inside where the oilcloth-lined back had held, and got it around her. He found the straightest piece of driftwood on the bank and bound her broken arm to it with strips torn off his shirt, talking low the whole time. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. Hold on to me. Squeeze my arm hard as you need. And she squeezed and bit down on a scream, and he set the arm and splinted it, his hands shaking almost as bad as hers. Then he got her up onto the gray, because the bay was gone downriver, and only the gray had made the crossing, and he swung up behind her and held her against his chest with one arm and took the reins with the other, and he pointed the horse toward the capital. Stay awake, he said into her wet hair. Lydia, you stay awake and you keep talking to me. Tell me what we do when we get there. Walk me through it. Keep that sharp mind working so I know you're still with me. Land office first, she murmured. Her teeth chattered. Show them the deed number. Confirm the filings intact. Then the federal marshal. Tell him everything, the fare, the forged bill of sale, the riders, the shot. Wickham's men are still on that bank. If the marshal sends riders, he can take them with the guns still on them. Good. Keep going. Then a lawyer, an honest one, to put it past undoing. My father said find an honest lawyer in the capital. He knew. 3 years ago dying, he knew exactly what they'd try. Her voice cracked. He knew them, Ethan. He knew his own town would do this to his daughter, and he tried to reach forward through 3 years and a block plane to stop them, and he almost didn't make it in time, and the only reason he did is you walked into a hall to buy salt. Stay awake. I'm awake. Tell me about the gold. Don't care about the gold, she said, and meant it, the truth of it surprising her even as she said it. Isn't that something? I'm half froze on a horse with a fortune in my coat, and I find I don't care a thing about the gold. I care that they lied to me. I care that they took my house and called it kindness and let me scrub floors for 3 years sitting on what was mine. The gold's just the proof. I want the proof. The capital came up out of the flats in the late afternoon, and the moment the streets closed around them, people wagons, the ordinary loud safe business of a real town. Lydia felt the danger fall away behind her like the far bank of the Pinto, and she let herself believe finally that they had made it. They made it. The land office clerk was a careful young man who took the deed number and went into the back and came out with a heavy bound ledger, and he found the entry and he turned the book around so Lydia could see it with her own eyes. Samuel Carter, the South 40. Filed 11 years past, paid in full free of all encumbrance, passing on the owner's death to his sole heir, Lydia Carter of Red Creek. No debts, no liens, no bill of sale. Nothing but the plain truth her father had written into a block plane and pressed into her hands the week before he died. It's all in order, ma'am, the clerk said. Has been the whole time. Nobody's touched it. A filing in this office can't be touched by a county or a township. That's the whole point of filing it here. He looked at her splinted arm, her river-soaked clothes, the hard man standing close at her shoulder. Though I'd venture somebody's tried. Somebody's tried, Lydia agreed. Where's the federal marshal? The marshal in the capital was a different breed from the tired old man Wickham had dragged up the mountain. He was young and sharp, and he listened to the whole of it, the fare, the forged paper, the chase, the shot fired at a woman in a river with a face that got harder by the sentence. And when Lydia told him 3 of Wickham's men were stranded that very hour on the far bank of the Pinto downriver, looking for a crossing with the guns still on them, that had fired on her, he stood up and reached for his hat. Ma'am, he said, I'm going to need you to write all that down and put your name to it. And then I'm going to need you to let a doctor look at that arm. And then if it's all the same to you, I'm going to ride out and collect some men off a riverbank. He paused at the door. It is a particular pleasure in this line of work to catch a man with the proof still wet in his hand. You've given me Harold Wickham wet in the hand, ma'am. I'm obliged to you. They caught Wickham that night, him and 2 hired men trying to ford the Pinto 8 miles down, and arguing about whether to turn back. The rifle that had been fired at Lydia was still in Wickham's saddle scabbard, freshly cleaned, which a clever man would have thrown in the river, and Wickham, for all his watch chains and respectability, was not finally a clever man, only a greedy one, and greed had carried him exactly as far as a riverbank, and no farther. It took the courts the better part of a season to unwind all of it. A circuit judge came through and heard it, and then a territorial court took the rest, and the whole rotten machinery of Red Creek came apart in the daylight, piece by piece. Mayor Hollis, confronted with his own seal on a bill of sale for a human being folded the way Calloway had said weak men always fold fast and completely, and with a great deal of weeping about how he'd only meant it as a kindness. He named the others to save his own neck. The debts that had taken the Carter house were shown to be invented out of whole cloth, signed off by Hollis and witnessed by the Reverend. The house itself quietly bought up cheap by Hollis's own brother-in-law. The Reverend's wife, Mrs. Abernathy, who had taken Lydia by the elbow and lectured her about pride, turned out to have known about the gold for 2 years and said nothing, hoping her husband might broker the sale of the land and take a cut. One after another, the respectable people of Red Creek were revealed for exactly what they were, and the thing they had counted on, that a poor orphaned woman would never have the means or the standing or the proof to make them answer, turned out in the end to be the one thing they were wrong about. Wickham went to federal prison. So, in time, did Hollis. The territory had no patience left 11 years after the war for men who dress up the selling of a person in legal paper and call it commerce. The land came back to Lydia free and clear, the gold, and all confirmed by a judge's own hand, and there was not a soul left in Red Creek with the standing to say one word against it. And through all of it, the depositions, the courtrooms, the long, careful unwinding, Ethan Calloway stood at her shoulder, not in front, side. He said little in those rooms full of lawyers. It was Lydia who spoke, Lydia, whose sharp, clear mind laid the case out plain. Lydia who looked Mayor Hollis in the eye across a courtroom and watched him fail to hold her gaze. But every time she finished and sat down, Calloway's hand would find hers under the table, brief and steady, and that was all she needed. It was only when it was all over, when the last paper was signed and the last man sentenced and the land was hers, beyond any undoing, that the thing between them, which had been put aside for the urgent business of survival and justice, finally came up to be settled. They were back on the mountain. Autumn now, the long hot summer broken at last, the first cold edge in the morning air. Her arm had healed crooked at the wrist and would ache when the weather turned for the rest of her life, and she found she didn't mind it. It was a thing she'd earned in a river getting free. She was at the table mending a shirt. His shirt, she noticed, and noticed too that she'd stopped thinking anything of mending his shirts when Calloway came in from the barn and stood just inside the door and did not take off his hat the way he always did. And she looked up and saw that he was nervous. This man who had faced down a marshal and a forged law and a flooded river, nervous as a boy. "Say it," she said. "Whatever it is. You've never once been able to hide a thing from me, and you're not starting now." Calloway turned his hat in his hands. "You're a rich woman now," he said. "That land, the gold, you could go anywhere. Buy a house in any town in the territory and never want for a thing the rest of your days. You could have any life you cared to pick." He swallowed. "You don't have to be up a mountain. You don't have to be doing hard work that'll never be finished. You don't have to mend a hard man's shirts in a cabin a half day from anywhere. You can have anything, Lydia. That's what I won for you, if I won anything. The right to choose. So I'd be a low kind of man if I didn't make sure you knew the door's wide open, same as it ever was. You can walk out of here a rich, free woman, and I'll saddle the horse myself and wish you nothing but joy." Lydia set down the shirt. "Is that what you want?" "God, no." It came out of him before he could dress it up, raw and immediate, and they both heard it. He shut his eyes. "No, that's not what I want. But what I want isn't the point. It was never the point. The point's what you want, and you've got every choice in the world now, and I won't be one more man who tries to keep you small enough to hold on to. If I have to lose you to your own free choosing, then that's the price of having done the thing right. I'll pay it. I won't like it, but I'll pay it." Lydia stood up. She crossed the room to him, and she stood close enough that he had to look down at her, and she reached up with her good hand and took the hat out of his and set it on the table. "You great fool," she said softly. "You think I want a house in a town I had a town. The town tried to sell me. You think I want to be rich among strangers who'll smile at my money the way Wickham smiled at my deed? I know exactly what that smile is worth. I learned it in a hall in Red Creek with 7 men weighing me like meat." Her voice was steady and sure. "You want to know what I want, Ethan Calloway? 3 years ago, a girl signed away everything she had because no one ever asked her what she wanted, and she swore, standing in that water with my arm broke, I swore that I'd never again let any man, kind or cruel, decide my life for me. Not even a good one. Especially not a good one, because a good man's the one you're tempted to let do it. So no, I'm not walking out that door. But not because I owe you, and not because I'm grateful, and not because I've got nowhere else to go. I've got everywhere else to go now. I could go anywhere on earth." She put her hand flat on his chest. "I'm staying because out of everywhere on earth, this is the one place I choose. You, this mountain, this life. I choose it free and clear, the way my father wanted everything for me. Free and clear, no debts on it, no man's price upon it. I'm not staying because I have to. I'm staying because I want to, and there has never in my whole life been a difference that mattered more than that one. Calloway's hand came up and covered hers where it lay on his chest. I love you, he said. Plain. No dressing on it. The first time. I think I have since you told that hall to look you in the eye. I didn't have a right to say it before, not while you were poor and beholden, and I was the only door open. A man can't say it to a woman who hasn't got a real choice. It's just one more cage, however pretty. But you've got the choice now. You've got every choice. So I can finally say it clean. I love you, Lydia Carter. And I'd have loved you just the same if there'd never been an ounce of gold under that spring. More, maybe. Because then it'd have been only us and the work and the long winters, and I'd have counted myself the richest man in the territory with not a cent to my name. Lydia smiled, a real one, the kind she'd refused the whole town, the kind she'd been saving without knowing it for a man who'd never once asked her for it. I know that, she said. That's the whole reason I can say it back. She rose up on her toes. I love you, Ethan. Not for the river, and not for the deed, and not for standing in that yard. For the bolt on the door. For the second chair you built 2 years before you knew my name. For the man who'd rather go without salt than go without being able to look at himself. That's the man I love. I'd have picked him out of any crowd on earth. I'd pick him now. And up on a mountain that no town could reach a half day from anywhere, with the first cold of autumn in the air, and a fortune that neither of them much cared about. Sitting in a bank in the capital. Ethan Calloway kissed Lydia Carter, and it was not a buyer and his purchase, and it was not a rescuer and his rescued, and it was not a kind man, and the woman who owed him. It was two free people, who had each looked at the other and chosen with their eyes wide open, with every other door in the world standing wide. They married before the snow came in a small church in the capital, with the young marshal as a witness and the honest lawyer as the other, and no one from Red Creek invited, and no one from Red Creek missed. Lydia wore her mother's quilt thrown over her shoulders, against the cold, because it was the finest thing she owned, and the only thing she wanted from her old life, and Calloway tipped his hat to her at the altar, the way he had in the hall, like it cost something. Like she was owed it, and she understood that he would go on tipping it to her every day of their lives, and that this small, constant, unbought courtesy was worth more than every grain of gold under the South 40. They worked the land together. Some of the gold they took enough to make the cabin a home, and the home a place that could weather any winter, and the rest they left in the ground where Samuel Carter had been wise enough to leave it, because they had both learned what gold did to people, and neither of them needed the proof a second time. Lydia set up her father's tools in a corner of the barn and took to carpentry the way she'd taken to everything, with a sharp eye and steady hands. And in time there was a child, and then another, and she taught them both the grain of wood, the way her father had taught her, her hand over their small hands. A sloppy stack falls, and a tight one stands all winter. She never went back to Red Creek. There was no reason to. But word came up the mountain now and again, the way word does, and the word was always the same, that the town had never recovered its name after the trials that decent folk passing through had heard the story and would not stop there, that the Founders' Fair was never held again. And once, years on, a traveler came up, the mountain trail lost and grateful for water, and over the meal he told them, not knowing who they were, the legend of the place. How a town down in the flats had once tried to sell a poor carpenter's daughter at a fair, and how a wild mountain man had walked in off the street and stopped the whole thing cold, and how the woman had turned out to own a fortune and brought the whole town to its knees in a federal court. They say she could have had any man in the territory after that, the traveler said, wiping his mouth. Rich as she was. But the story goes, she married the mountain man, the half-wild one. Now why on earth would a woman with all that gold marry a man with nothing but a cabin and a mountain? Lydia looked across the table at her husband Gray, coming into his beard now, their youngest asleep against his shoulder, and she answered the traveler the way she would have answered anyone, the way she would answer to the end of her days, with no hesitation and no doubt, and her chin as ever level. Because he was the only man who ever asked her what she wanted, she said. And then he listened to the answer. There is no fortune on this earth worth more than that, sir, and any woman who's been weighed like meat in a hall will tell you the same. She did not marry him for what he had. She married him for what he never once tried to take. And she has not been sorry for a single day, and she will tell you so herself. Because she is sitting right here, and her name is Lydia Calloway, and she chose this life with her own 2 eyes wide open, and she would choose it again.